Hello, everybody. Today is July 17th, 2026. Exactly 12 years ago, on July 17th, 2014, Malaysia Airlines flight MH17 was shot down over eastern Ukraine with 300, almost 300 people, 298 people on board who got killed. Families were shattered. Communities were changed forever. And the world witnessed how this, at first, it seemed like an insignificant local conflict somewhere in Ukraine. Who cares about Ukraine? How that conflict affects everybody, can affect everybody. In this video, I want to tell the story of MH17 flight. What happened? How investigation was carried out, how Russia's narrative shifted again and again, and why accountability still matters. MH17 started from Amsterdam, heading to Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, flying at 10 kilometers, over 10 kilometers above eastern Ukraine, and below in the Donbas region was an active war zone. Russian-backed militants and Ukrainian forces were fighting daily battles. Several Ukrainian aircrafts had already been shot down, and Ukraine has raised the minimum flight altitude a couple of days earlier. So I believe the MH17 was flying at 10.5 kilometers because at that time there was very little reason to believe, no reason to believe that the so-called Donetsk People Republic fighters possessed the equipment capable of shooting down airplanes flying at that altitude. And Russia always continuously denied its participation in the conflict. Shortly after 4 p.m. Kiev time, MH17 was shot down by a Buk surface-to-air missile. The aircraft broke apart mid-air. Debris fell near Grabovo in Donetsk Oblast. Within minutes, the leader of the separatists, the FSB colonel Igor Strelkov-Girkin, posted in his social media that his forces has shot down a Ukrainian transport aircraft An-26. And Russian TV congratulated the freedom fighters. They called it one more victory of the freedom fighters. So Russia's first narrative admitted responsibility because Russian-backed militants believed that they shot down a Ukrainian aircraft. And when it became clear that the aircraft was not Ukrainian, that it was a civilian aircraft, Girkin's post disappeared, but internet remembers everything. Right after the post, Girkin claimed that the bodies found in the wreckage had been dead already for a long time. So it was full of dead bodies. And so he tried to make a point that this was some sort of a provocation. It was staged, he was trying to imply. And this, of course, contradicted all forensic evidence. Within 24 hours, Russian officials then proposed a different version of these events. They claimed that it was Ukraine who shot MH17 flight with the Su-25 fighter jet, and the so-called head of the so-called Donetsk People Republic, Alexander Zakharchenko, even claimed that he had seen that Ukrainian jet shooting down the aircraft with his own eyes. And this was all lie. Zakharchenko lied. This was physically impossible because MH17 was flying at above 10 kilometers, whereas the Su-25 fighter jet cannot operate that high in the air. And radar data showed no Ukrainian aircraft near MH17. The Russians then conducted an experiment. As evidence, the corporation Almaz&Tay, which produces the Buk systems, they mounted a Buk missile near the front part of an aircraft, and they detonated the missile to investigate the damage that the front part of the aircraft would suffer in that experiment. And as a result, surprise, they claimed that Buk could not have possibly caused such a damage as found in the what remained of MH17. The experiment was flawed because the character of the damage depends crucially on the position of the missile, which explodes, on the distance from the machine. So nothing really could be concluded from this experiment. But okay, so for some time, the Russians claimed that Buk could not have possibly produced such a damage. And finally, Russia acknowledged that MH17 was destroyed by a Buk missile, but they claimed naturally that the missile belonged to Ukraine, not to Russia. And I do not remember when they shifted to this narrative, to these allegations, but it was several years after the event. Of course, these claims contradicted the serial number records and the satellite imagery and the intercepted communications, as well as the documented movement of the Buk launcher from Russia, from Kursk region in Russia to Donetsk and to Donbass and back. So across all these years, Russia cycled through several, like 4 or 5 incompatible narratives, each contradicting the previous one. Despite this disinformation, the investigation proceeded under the international aviation law, and the Dutch Safety Board concluded that MH17 flight was destroyed by a Russian-made Buk missile fired from the separatist-controlled territory. The joint investigation team, the JIT, formed by Netherlands, Australia, Belgium, Malaysia, and Ukraine, found that the Buk launcher belonged to the Russian 53rd Anti-Aircraft Missile Brigade. It was transported from Russia into Donbass on the day of the attack. It returned to Russia immediately after firing. And these findings were supported by the US intelligence and independent forensic analysis. Russia claimed that it didn't participate. Russia stated something like, "We do not recognize the investigation results by the joint investigation team because Russia was not part of this investigation." This is pretty hypocritical, because Russia deliberately omits a key fact that Russia could have been part of the investigation, that in fact Russia has been invited to participate in this investigation, but Russia chose not to participate in that investigation. In the summer 2015, 1 year after the shootdown, the Netherlands, Malaysia, Australia, Belgium, and Ukraine proposed creating an international tribunal under the UN Security Council. All Security Council members supported this idea. Russia was the only country which opposed this tribunal. Russia used its veto power to block the tribunal. So the veto prevented the creation of a fully international court, the very mechanism that Russia later claimed it had been excluded from. No, Russia, you excluded yourself from the investigation. So after Russia blocked the tribunal, the investigation continued under the International Civil Aviation Organization protocols, under the umbrella of the United Nations. The joint investigation team under this protocol included the country where the accident occurred, which is Ukraine, the country that owns the aircraft, which is Malaysia, and the countries whose citizens were killed, which is Netherlands. Most of the passengers in MH17 were Dutch citizens. Also Australia and Belgium. So later claims that the investigation was biased came after refusing to join the investigation, refusing to share radar data, and refusing to provide the requested military information by Russia. Russia did not collaborate with the investigation. In the year 2022, that is after 7 years of investigation, 3 individuals, Igor Girkin, already mentioned, and also Sergei Dubinsky and Leonid Harchenko, were sentenced by the Dutch court to life imprisonment in absentia. The European Human Rights Court in 2025 ruled that Russia was responsible for the downing of MH17, which violated human rights. Also, the International Civil Aviation Organization Council concluded that Russia breached the international aviation obligations. And all this happened after Russia started a full-scale invasion against Ukraine on February 24th, 2022. MH17 changed global perception of the war in Ukraine. It showed that the conflict was not local, not internal, and not limited. It had global consequences and global victims. The tragedy strengthened international sanctions and forced aviation authorities to reconsider flight routes over conflict zones. Every year at the MH17 National Monument in Netherlands, the names of 298 victims are read aloud. Families gather, grieving, fighting for the truth. Ceremonies take place across the Netherlands, Australia, Malaysia, and other countries whose citizens were murdered. But yet, after all this, Russia remained an important trading partner for many of the countries whose citizens were killed. Russia remained a global decision maker, one of the 5 permanent members of the United Nations Security Council, with the power to veto international tribunals, the power to veto all decisions made by the UN Security Council, to block resolutions, to shape global policies. And as I look at the last 12 years, I keep asking myself, How much more blood needs to be shed before the world confronts the reality that Russia is not a state, it is a terrorist organization? How long can a country responsible for the deaths of 298 passengers of MH17 flight and countless others in Ukraine, how long can this country hold a permanent seat at the United Nations Security Council? This is a legal question. This is a moral question. And I do not know the answer.